The Hard Target.
You miss me?
From internationally acclaimed action director John Woo.
How's it feel to be hunted? You tell me.
Hard Target.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars and welcome to another of my classic Jean-Claude Van Damme reviews. Today I'm taking a look at the 1993 film Hard Target. The film is directed by John Woo and stars, of course, Jean-Claude Van Damme as well as the great Lance Henriksen, Yancy Butler and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now this essentially is another take on The Most Dangerous Game, but this is one of the most successful takes, if you like, on that formula that we see so often done today, mainly in low budget movies, but you do see it in other things like The Hunt and what have you. So it's still a formula that is very, very popular today. And the film focuses on Jean-Claude Van Damme's character Chance Boudreaux, who they're in, is it Louisiana, something like that. They're in the South anyway, and Yancy Butler's character Natasha has turned up in town looking for her father, not knowing that her father, who is an ex-veteran, is living homeless on the streets and very recently took part in like a human hunt to earn some money, which is basically Lance Henriksen and Arnold Schwarzenegger's characters, Fouchon and Pick, put together hunts for rich assholes who go out and hunt human beings for sport, and they basically hunt homeless people who are ex-veterans. Usually, that's who they like to use. So Yancy Butler's father is dead. She finds out he's dead. She hires the help of Jean-Claude Van Damme, who basically become targets themselves for Lance Henriksen and Arnold Schwarzenegger's characters. And then they become the next hunt. Right, what are my thoughts on Hard Target? Well, as I said, this is a very, very familiar formula. Definitely one of the most successful. This was what you could describe as, in those days anyway, a box office success, certainly for Van Damme, whose star was absolutely on the rise at this point in his career. To the point where, you know, he was starting to get a little bit difficult on set, apparently, you know, turning up late, all that kind of stuff, insisting that cameras were always shooting his muscles and all this kind of stuff. And this was John Woo's first English language film. He obviously went on to do arguably better things like Face Off in this country and other things as well. Now, I do want to say right off the bat, other than Fate, I mean, I do quite like this film. I like the other stuff that John Woo has done. But I think his films, in regards to how stylistic they are, have aged quite terribly. They're almost Michael Bay-ish in how they're filmed, you know, with lots of slow-mo and doves flying everywhere. And it was very fashionable at the time, and it felt unique and different at the time. And it still probably stands up and works in films like Face Off, which I think is definitely his greatest American film, certainly. But you watch them now, and they do feel out of date in the way they're filmed. And I've never been a huge fan anyway of the stylistic approach of how John Woo makes movies. I just think sometimes, especially when you look at things like the John Wick franchise and how they've turned the action in that into an art form, almost like a ballet, or, you know, it's just beautiful to watch. And I get that's what John Woo was going for all them years ago. He was years ahead of his time. Just the way he kind of went about it was never real. I was never really a big fan of it. But obviously one of the most talented directors of all time. Is just stylistically, it just never really worked for me how he made movies. But that's not to say that this is a bad film. I don't think it is a bad film. It's not my favourite Van Damme film. Although I am sure many of you watching this, and maybe let me know in the comments, this certainly may be yours. And there's a lot of reasons why I do think this is an excellent film, and certainly a very, very enjoyable and watchable film. Number one, Van Damme. Obviously, like I say, he was at the peak of his career at this point. You know, he's great in this film. He doesn't say a lot, and you could argue, thankfully, because at this point in his career, his acting was still a little bit wobbly sort of thing. But the action, how they make Van Damme look in this film is just brilliant, in regards to his martial arts. And even though he doesn't do loads of martial arts in this film, it's more of a straight action film, this, with lots of gunplay and things like that. He still looks great in this film, and, you could tell he was a star. But also, as well, Lance Henriksen is brilliant as the main bad guy in this film. He's always been good when it comes to playing a villain, Lance Henriksen. Just check out his career and look at how many times he's played the villain. He can do it effortlessly, and he's very, very good at it. And he was a great, great choice to play the lead villain here in this film. But also, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who went on, you could argue, to greater things when he was the Mummy in the Mummy franchise, and he did the Darkman films. He's pretty good in this film as well, and there's an undeniable chemistry between himself and Lance Henriksen. Essentially, he plays Pick, who is like Lance Henriksen's right-hand man sort of thing. They're like a double team. They're very, very good in this film. They do make memorable villains for the Van Damme character. Now, the film for me really takes off when himself and Yancy Butler's character become the targets of the hunt. Up to that point, it's almost like an investigation. She turns up in town, Yancy Butler, trying to find her father, hires Van Damme to help her track down her father, and they start uncovering this thing that's happening in their town, where Lance Henriksen and Arnold Schwarzenegger are hunting people. So they uncover all this. They find out that the local prominent people are involved in it and all that kind of stuff, in this corruption that's going on, and then they become the targets. So up to that point, even though they throw in a couple of action scenes, the film really takes off when they both of them become the hunted. To say nothing of the fact that they're running riot. There are some silly scenes in this film where they're like kind of running riot. Lance Henriksen and Arnold Schwarzenegger killing people literally in plain sight of people watching, and there's no comeback. It only seems to be one police officer in this place. It does stretch the believability factor to a large degree, this film, but you can kind of forgive it at the same time. So probably like the second half of the film is much stronger than the first half of the film, in my opinion, when they are hunting them down. It's a lot of fun to watch. Just a shame that they don't give Yancy Butler's character anything to do other than be, for the most part, the damsel in distress. That hasn't aged very well at all. I mean, it's very much of its time, I suppose. You wouldn't get away with it now. You've got to kind of give, women parts in these movies and give them something significant to do. And she definitely doesn't have anything significant to do in the film. Interestingly, the film is obviously John Woo's version of a Western. It's his first American film. He's probably living out his fantasy and, grew up watching American Westerns and stuff. He's it's obviously tipping his hat towards the Westerns of the time, of years gone by in Hollywood. Sam Raimi was brought on board, apparently, and I think he's down as one of the producers, but in actual fact, he was also there on set the majority of the time, because John Woo's English wasn't great. It was his first English language film, and they wanted to make sure that he didn't mess up, and Sam Raimi was basically there to take over if things kind of went sideways, which they never did, but apparently they did get on set anyway. Kurt Russell was down initially to play the lead of Chance Boudreaux, but apparently they didn't want to wait like 2 years because he was really busy at the time. And then the studio decided to go with Van Damme because they realised he was a star on the rise, sort of thing. But this is definitely a strong Van Damme film. It's not one of my favourites personally. I think a lot of that is down to, like I said, John Woo's direction, and a lot of that is down to the formula. The Most Dangerous Game type formula has been done to death, and I've seen so many of types of those films, they become a little bit tiresome. And I know this came out in 93, but still, Even watching it then, it didn't necessarily click with me the way some of the other Van Damme films did, but definitely one in his filmography that many people enjoy for sure. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll be back with more content on the channel very soon.